Good afternoon. We want to welcome everybody here today and thank you for taking time to join us. We will have a number of members that will be coming in as we are speaking, but we appreciate you taking the time to pack in here today. One of the things you'll notice about this press conference is it's bipartisan. We will be joined by the co-chairman of the Congressional Prayer Caucus, Mike McIntyre, in just a few moments, and we have members from both parties. It's also a press conference which includes members of Congress and non-members of Congress because they're all representative of millions of Americans across this country who are concerned about the National Day of Prayer. We're here today, unfortunately, because of this decision that was rendered on April 15th in the Western District of Wisconsin by a single federal judge. That judge took it upon herself to determine and to declare that the National Day of Prayer was unconstitutional. Now, it's important as we start to note that's not what the Constitution says. That's what one unelected judge says the Constitution says. It's also important for us to note that the effect of what this judge's decision was basically to substitute her opinion for almost every Congress that has been in existence in the United States, both before and after the Constitution was written, by almost every president that served in the White House, and by the legislatures of all 50 states. It's also important to look at the extrapolation of this decision for any of you who've had time to read it. If not, you might want to read it, because essentially if you extrapolate the themes in this particular decision, you would have to determine that if the Declaration of Independence was written today and presented to this judge, she would make one of two determinations. She would either say that the signers of that document did not mean what they said when they said that our rights came from God Himself, from a Creator, and that they were pledging their lives and their fortunes and their sacred honor to defend that proposition, or she would determine that it was unconstitutional. Understand what that basically means. The very document that gave legitimacy to the Constitution, she is doing a bootstrap argument to basically say that document would have been unconstitutional. It's also important, if you read this opinion, that this judge basically says that her opinion is more important than the historical statements and actions of the people who drafted the Constitution and what they said, because she indicates and says specifically in the opinion that just because they drafted the Constitution doesn't mean that they did actions that were in keeping with the Constitution. The other thing that's important is that we heed John Kennedy's great speech in his inauguration when he warned us that we needed to be careful that we defended the proposition of the Founding Fathers, which said that our rights did not come from the generosity of the state, but rather from the hand of God Himself. The First Amendment that the Founders had never intended that it be placed as a restriction on ideas, thoughts, and opinions coming into the marketplace of ideas, but rather it was intended as a throttle to keep those ideas coming into that great marketplace. Because the Founders of our great nation believed that in the marketplace of ideas, truth would win out. This decision is not representative of a vast majority of Americans, regardless of their faith or even their non-faith, because they believe and they want an open marketplace of ideas. Rather, it is representative of a very small minority of individuals across the country. Understand that, as stated in this decision, the purpose of the plaintiffs in this decision were to educate people on the non-existence of God. What you find here is that they do not want to compete in a marketplace of ideas for their proposition. They've had centuries to do that, and they've lost. What they want to do is to exclude concepts and ideas of faith and religion and morality from coming into that marketplace of ideas. So where do we go from here? I think just a couple of things. The first thing is we're here today to encourage the White House to make sure that they appeal this decision and that they fight as vigorously as possible to make sure this decision does not become the law of the land in the United States. Secondly, we'll be presenting a resolution one that's been written by Lamar Smith, also Todd Tiahrt, which will basically say that we believe the National Day of Prayer is constitutional and reaffirming our support of that document. Lamar Smith is not here today, but he wanted me to read this statement since he is the co-sponsor of one of these resolutions. And he says this: "The recognition and celebration of the right of Americans to pray is in no way unconstitutional. Setting aside a day of prayer and thanksgiving is a national tradition that first began with George Washington. This is not an establishment of religion, which would be unconstitutional, but merely the acknowledgement of the role prayer has played in our nation's history and the importance of prayer. The National Day of Prayer imposes no duties or burdens on any Americans, since anyone can choose to enjoy it or ignore it. If this is unconstitutional, what's next? Declaring the federal holiday for Christmas unconstitutional. Congress needs to send a clear message to the courts that we will not allow unelected federal judges to restrict the constitutional rights of Americans." The other thing we need to recognize is what these plaintiffs have as their strategy and this small minority of people who want to keep faith and religion out of the marketplace of ideas. They scour the country to attempt to shop for the forums that they think will be receptive to their ideas. And then they shop for the judges that they think will also be receptive. And then they focus their resources on that one area. We need to change our strategy and make sure we are carrying this debate, these ideas, across America every place we can, in all of our state legislatures, in every area, in every venue that we can, and that's a message that we're sending out today. We've got a number of people that have joined us today who want to express their thoughts about this. As I mentioned, Congressman Mike McIntyre is not here yet, but I think Mike is on his way. I would at this time like to present one of the original co-sponsors of the 1988 law establishing National Day of Prayer, Congressman Frank Wolf. Frank?
Thank you, Randy. It's good to be here, and with me is my colleague, you ought to come on up, Tony, Congressman Tony Hall, one of my best friends in Congress, and Tony was the original sponsor of the bill. There were four of us on the bill at that time. It was Congressman Hall, then former Congressman Bob Garcia, who lives out in the Northern Virginia area, and Congressman Carlos Moorhead, and myself, the four of us, and we were together at the White House with a joint group of people from every faith where President Reagan signed the bill. Unfortunately, what brings us together today is a misguided court decision which threatens a long-standing tradition in this country. Since its founding, America has been shaped by a profound respect for religious freedom and a deeply held conviction that God is the author of our liberty. I urge the Obama administration to appeal this decision, to dedicate the best and the brightest minds at the Justice Department to this case, to ensure that the rulings by the U.S. District Court of the Western District of Wisconsin does not stand. Prayer is part of the fabric of our shared national history. A hardy band of patriots who comprised the First Continental Congress made their first act an act of prayer. A nation ripped apart by civil war prayed for God's mercies. American presidents have issued 164 proclamations calling on the people of our country to pray. And in closing, in 1986, President Reagan issued one such proclamation. His words capture well the place of prayer in this country. He said, and I quote, "Indeed, the true meaning of our entire history as a nation can scarcely be glimpsed without some notion of the importance of prayer. Our declaration of dependence on God's favor on this unfinished enterprise we call America. On our National Day of Prayer, then, we join together as people of many faiths to petition God to show His mercy and His love to heal our weariness and uphold our hope, that we may live ever mindful of His justice and thankful for His blessing." And with that, I just introduced the original author of the bill, who put together the idea, former Congressman Tony Hall from Dayton, Ohio. Tony?
Thank you. I used to represent Dayton, Ohio for 24 years. I'm a Democrat, and I was very proud to be the major sponsor of this legislation in 1988. Actually, it started